Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome back to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. If you like to think of data as the new oil, then you can consider us like Car Talk. However, we can't go on a road trip because of the coronavirus lockdown. So it's just Andy and I kind of stuck at home, respectively. And thanks to the magic of technology, we can be on the show at the same time. And how's it going, Andy?
It's going well, Frank. How are you doing?
Good. You'll probably hear my kids in the background.
We will, and you know what, Frank? I think it's fine. I understand why you said the word stuck, but you and I work remotely an awful lot. We usually record like this. There's less in the background at your place most of the time, but you have a couple of young boys there, and you need to be in the room with them when Mom, who's also working from home, is doing some of her work. So I kudos to you, to both of you. For finding a way to manage this. Everybody's going through these sorts of things, and I'm sure that none of our listeners will mind hearing your sons play in the background.
Well, hopefully they won't start fighting. So that's all I ask. That's all I ask.
If they do,
so I think a lot of folks can relate, though.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So we're recording this on April 16th. Speaking of kids, we had your son on, which if the order of recording goes the way I planned it in my head, that would have been released last week.
Mm-hmm.
and which I thought was a pretty good discussion on kind of how STEM is taught, how STEM is perceived by quote unquote policymakers. Yep. And how the actuality of it is, and some of the interesting stuff your son is doing with Raspberry Pi and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was very proud of him. The work that he's doing, and he's had his hands in machine learning for really a couple of 3 years now. I want to say he was 14, and I came into his room, just checking on him to say something or something. I saw Mario Brothers playing in the background. I was like, what do you think? He had done his schoolwork. He was homeschooled at the time. He'd done his schoolwork, so he knew what he wants. But later talking to him about it, he said, he actually came and got me, and he said, okay, Dad, it took, I think it was like 6, neural nodes here. He was able to, Mario was able to figure this out in something like 4 hours or something. And later, he said, I wonder what it would do if I added a node. I wonder what that would do to it. And I'm kind of sitting there with my mouth hanging open going, show Dad more about that.
Nice.
But he's been doing it for a while. I know your kids are interested in the same thing. They're younger. So Stevie's 17 now. And, and I know that your sons are coming up in this age as well. They are, I mentioned Mark Tabadillo in that show as he referred to digital natives. They are digital natives. And that comes with some pretty interesting stuff. So I'm just glad we were able to, to record that show as he gets ready for his first SQL Saturday presentation here on that topic. So,
and that's all assuming that we were able to overcome the technical glitch.
we learned something, Frank. It's not a glitch.
Yeah, it's not a glitch if you learn something. So if right. For some reason the what hit the fan, then that episode will be re-recorded at a future date. So we'll see.
It will, but we've got a great topic today. You and I have been batting this around. I know it's been several weeks. It may have been a couple of months. Right. We've been talking about doing this.
Right, absolutely. And part of what motivates this, and based on the release schedule that I anticipate, this will have already happened. I'm changing jobs at Microsoft.
Woohoo! What's your new job, Frank?
I will be the data and the AI technology architect at the Reston MTC, or Microsoft Technology Center.
Nice.
So
congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to join such a prestigious team. If you're not familiar with what the MTC is a Microsoft Technology Center. There's about 80 of them around the world, and they basically are meant to provide specific experiences and as well as architecture design guidance for customers around the world. And it's an honor to be kind of in that team. It's very rarely does an opening happen in an MTC. So when one opened up in my neck of the woods, I was like, I have to take it. I have to at least try.
Right.
So fortunately, I am super excited. And because that's what we say at Microsoft. We're super excited. And it's a great team, great stuff that they do. They do a lot of work with the community. They do a lot of work with customers. It's just an awesome gig. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really excited about it.
Congratulations, brother. That's what a great thing, and I think you're perfect for that job. I know someone else in that job at an MTC in the Northeast, and it's kind of a rare breed of person that has to walk into that role because optimally, you have a smattering of exposure to a whole slew of enterprise, architecture, and both you and this other individual that I know fit that mold. You've got programming experience, software development experience, and you also have data experience, and it's just rare to be good at both of those things. But I know you're good at it, and I know my other friend is good at this as well. So I just think it's going to be a great fit for you, Frank. I'm excited you got it.
Thank you very much. So with that, one of the things that I've been ramping up on in anticipation for this job or whatever opportunity I was going to go to next, I was learning more about the quote-unquote traditional side of the data world, which let me kind of explain my little worldview, which as twisted and as weird as it may be, it might actually be right. I see this a lot in my current or old role, current as of April 16th role, is that we have data and AI cloud solution architects. But there's a very clear line of demarcation between the data scientist part of the data and AI CSAs and the SQL veterans side of things. So I actually had a call this morning where it was very, very much laid bare because we were talking about that, and that there's essentially kind of two types of data and AI folks at Microsoft for sure, probably everywhere else too. You have the RDBMS folks. These folks have been doing SQL since it was a Sybase joint venture, right?
Right.
That's their world. And you have kind of the big data open source kind of tooling world, right? The folks that are more comfortable in Spark or Hadoop, or with the crazy statistics and math around machine learning and AI, right? You kind of have those two. Rarely do you have a person who's comfortable and happy in both. I am aiming to be happy and comfortable in both. Obviously, I'm more in the data science kind of world, and part of what I see as the opportunity in this new role is to grow into the kind of the SQL RDBMS traditional database world.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Fair. No, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, coming at this from as we've shared in each show the past few days that we've recorded, we've known each other for like 15 years. And most of that time, you were a professional software developer. You were a Microsoft MVP in, I forget which discipline it was, Frank. I know it was software development related.
I think the world has forgotten that this discipline ever existed. Tablet PC.
Tablet PC, right. Okay. And you did an awful lot in there. And I know there's a lot of people out there working in what that evolved into, mobile. That benefited from the blog posts you shared, solutions you shared, and all of that. But that whole mobile thing turned out not to be such a trend. It was a trend, and it evolved. into what it is now. And having that experience, I think, is you're going to find that plays well into kind of backfilling, like you said, or filling this other bucket that you want to go after, which is traditional T-SQL. And I know from experience and dabbling in machine learning and AI. I'm on the opposite side of the fence, although I'm not really that good at I'd say like DBA level T-SQL. But I can hold my own in there. But if we're selling tuning, performance tuning to a client, I may be involved in the project, but rarely am I the person actually performing the tuning. There are lots of people out there that we subcontract as a consulting firm, enterprise data and analytics. We bring others in who are better at that, much better at that than I am. And we have people on the team who are much better than I am as well. But it's I think your experience has set you up really well to make this transition. And it will, like everything else, right? We talked about this in the other shows. It takes time, and it's frustrating. But I think you're well positioned to pick up this skill as fast or faster than almost anyone else I know.
Well, thank you.
No,
Well,
I think
part of it is
it's
too.
good.
I'm not completely like naive to the ways of our DBMS. I took SQL in college and database design in college,
Hmm.
and my professor worked with COD and Date. So
Wow.
like I'm only 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon away um, from the founders of the theory. So that's going for me. But I never really got into just kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And I'm not concerned about that. I'm actually fascinated about it because it's just another way to solve the same problem.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, you're moving bits around, and
True.
it's a question of what's your philosophy. Or obviously, our DBMS has a philosophy, and I'm not knocking it. I mean, it worked well for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
Uh, but now we live in a world where there's a lot more unstructured data, and how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with it now that you're not making assumptions about spinning disks, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
there's a
There's just a
whole,
lot of that. Yeah, a
I
lot
think
of
it's a
that
Kevin
design.
Hazard.
Oh,
That's
go ahead.
Kevin Hazard, isn't it?
Yeah, who talked about that on our show? That yeah, and there's still it's 2020, and I would
Right.
say still most of our code is designed for that age of the heads
I see.
picking up, seeking a sector, and reading data, and then picking up again.
So there's a whole new opportunity where obviously relational databases are going to still matter, but
Oh, sure.
they're just going to be one of many tool sets. In fact, one of the things that I learned when I was doing startup evangelism for Microsoft was, having debates with startup founders who are, I will say, I'll put them in the hipster category, right? I worked with when you work with startups, it runs the gamut between really this person's going to be the next Steve Jobs to this person is kind of like, I think they're living on their parents' basement, but rather than saying they're unemployed, they have a thing. So somewhere in the middle, you kind of have what I have the hipster ones where they learned code
Hmm.
because of to make their startup. Now that's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-mm.
But to think that you're an expert in all things technology because you learned to code,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and then you go to a person that is supposed to help you take your stuff to the next level and kind of talk down to them. So
Right. Right.
that's the context of this conversation. So they were basically lamenting the fact that they wanted to have the reliability of um, an RDBMS, but they wanted to
Right.
do it in a NoSQL type of environment. And I was
And
like,
that's a fair, that's a fair thing to want. I'm just all cards on the table approaching that architecturally. That's not an unreasonable request, but unless and until you get into the engineering part of it, and that's where you start to see that you just can't have everything that you want. I mean, there's no single uh, do it all type application. Every software application ever, and I'm going to maintain probably forever, there are going to be applications, there's going to be some spot that I define as a corner. It's something that the application or server or what have you doesn't do well. And what you'll often find is there's some other application out there that's available or some other platform. And it will do that part well. But again, that also has its corners. And so what you're trading is pain. In the
Right,
nicest way
right.
possible. You're picking your poison, picking your pain. What is it that you want to fight? And it depends on, relational databases have their pain points. NoSQL, it turns out a lot of companies have learned this over the past few years, also has its pain points as well. So
You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might get what you need.
awesome.
No, so I mean, part of it is, sometimes whether it's technology or anything else, you have kind of these dueling philosophies,
Oh, absolutely.
and there's a point where they just won't meet, just because of they're kind of philosophically opposed. And you're right, you have to kind of pick which one you want to have over the other.
Yeah.
And there's cause and effect to that.
Yep.
So, with that kind of deep philosophical, you were a data philosopher, so that's good. So, I wanted to talk to you about. We wanted to do a deep dive. It's not officially a deep dive until I have fun with my soundboard there.
That's it. Yeah.
Into data warehousing. What is data warehousing? Where did it start? I'll channel a little bit of BoJack Horseman. What is data warehousing? What do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out.
Well, data warehousing, in my opinion and in my experience, is really this idea of collecting data from all over different places and placing it into a centralized location. Now, there's some distinctions and there's other scientific answers to that question. And you can actually build something that today is not considered technically a data warehouse. You can gather all of the information that's spread across the enterprise in different places into what's now called an operational data store. And it's not totally unlike a data warehouse. In fact, I think the Euler diagrams have quite a bit of overlap for that. At least if we kind of improve or add to the word data warehouse or the term data warehouse with relational data warehousing. There's a lot of overlap between relational data warehousing and an operational data store. So I don't want to confuse that really with our listeners, but I just want to make you aware, if you hear ODS or DW or EDW, it could be that they're talking about largely the same thing. And when you think about supply chain management, which is a topic on everyone's mind these days, as we're talking about the economic impact of the pandemic, supply chains are really way more important than we realize. And it's kind of like oxygen or money. You don't recognize how important it is until you don't have enough. So and supply chains are like this. And you can think of a data warehouse in that terminology. The analogy holds for quite a bit. And I'm just going to use Walmart and Amazon as kind of examples of this. They both have these distribution centers, and they have these networks set up all over the United States, probably all over the world. And it's places where the goods come from the source and they're trucked into, they may be collected at other points along the way, but they're trucked into these physically large warehouses and then stocked. And then from there, they're actually shipped out to, in the case of Amazon, usually they're handed off to some delivery service. In the case of Walmart, they're placed on other Walmart trucks that are shipped to the stores, the actual brick and mortar stores. And that warehouse in the middle, that distribution center, that's what I think of when I think of data warehouses. I think of the electronic equivalent of that, because there's all of these. You'll see, especially at what I consider an EDW, Enterprise Data Warehouse. You've got a collection of companies that have been acquired in mergers and acquisitions, and they're looking at. I want to get all of their data, at what they have, and I want to bring that into this one location. And that I want it there for a number of reasons, but one of the big reasons is so I can query that data and I can learn how my entire enterprise is performing. How's it working? And in that, if I apply that Walmart Amazon analogy to that, to the data there, the reports that come out of querying a data warehouse, those are like the end user customers for Amazon, say, and like the Walmart stores in that other analogy. So and it really turns out, Frank, it's always good to answer the question, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And here's the problem most people are trying to solve with an enterprise data warehouse. They want to know, how's my business doing today? And if they can answer that question, that's going to be answered by a report of some kind or an analytics dashboard. Still a report in my mind. And the best analogy is something we're used to. It's a stoplight. Are we green? Everything's good or good enough. Are we yellow? Some things are in trouble. And most enterprise data warehouses during the pandemic are going to be showing yellow or some red. We're in trouble. There's going to be very few showing green. But that's kind of the thing that you want. You want to know at the very highest level, are we good? Are we bad? Or are we somewhere in the middle? And of course, you want to always be able to drill in, especially if things are, in the warning state or in the bad state. You definitely want to drill in, see what the problem is, pick up more information about that. But at the very tippy top, you want to be able to answer that question. How are we doing today?
So I have two questions. One is, you mentioned that with mergers and acquisitions, you want to have one place for all the data to live.
Sure.
How is a data warehouse different than a data lake?
That's a really good question. So you can think about data lakes being a similar collection point. So from a purely functional standpoint, my experience with data lakes, I'll share, is limited. So that, to take this with a grain of salt. But I consider data lakes to be more of just a collection of the data, a copy of the data in its raw or raw-ish state. And when I draw a line between what I call a data warehouse and what I call an operational data store, they're more on that side of the operational data store. They're more of a copy of the data from wherever it's come from. Now, I know for a fact, working with people who work with data lakes, that they see that a little bit differently, and I'm not going to speak for them, but I just know that my definition and their definition differs a little bit, because you can achieve an awful lot of what an enterprise data warehouse does for you in delivering those results that answer the question, how are we doing today? You can achieve a lot of that just going by directly querying the data in a data lake. And the same can be said for an ODS. So don't I'm trying to mix and match here and draw some distinctions. I wish I could share with you the picture in my mind. But
maybe we'll add it to the show notes.
Well, we'll do our best.
So one of the things is that someone on my side, where I kind of see things from more the data lake point of view. You just want a place for stuff to land, whether that's coming from streaming data from IoT or from various types of data stores. You just want a place to put the stuff.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
One of the things I've seen in architectures is that, at least kind of in more modern architectures, because historically I think data warehouses have been used like data lakes.
Oh, they have.
But one of the things that at least data warehouses they still assume a schema, right? Like you still have to have a schema, right, for it to be in a data warehouse. So if you have completely unstructured data, you're still dealing with the primacy of the schema.
Right.
That's
a fair
thing?
It is. And what I was going to share too is just thinking through this a little bit more. One of the distinctions that I'll make certainly from a relational data warehouse between that and an operational data store is, there's a little bit of hybrid here. And let's just I'm going to take ODS out of the picture for just a minute. I'm going to talk about staging from an extract, transform, and load, or ETL, or data engineering, data integration, whatever you want to call it, perspective. Whatever format that data's in when it starts its trek, into, into whatever we're going to end up with an EDW. When it begins that, the very first thing I like to do, and that is an area where I specialize, is I want to get a copy of that data into some central location. Now, it could be that central location is a data lake, and often in modern data warehouses they are. It goes into a data lake, but it could also be a relational database, or it could be just a centralized collection of files. And there's a lot of things that you can define here, but there's this concept of it at the very first step, collecting and staging. It's all here now. And I still do that when I'm designing, ETL solutions for customers. I get it to that first step, that first place first. And I want to get it all there. And I mostly deal still with relational data warehouses that go to tabular models or cubes, some sort of analytics solution. And, when I do that, Frank, if let's say I want to load data from files into a SQL server, I load that data. It's just as constraint free as possible. So if it exists in the file, I want to read whatever's in that field and bring it into a table, what we would call a heap in relational database management. If there's any constraint on it, it's some sort of identity column that's just, counting the rows, basically enumerating the rows. And that's there just to make sure no row is identical to any other row. And that would be the only constraint I would place on that. And I would do the same for a data lake. If we were pumping data into a data lake, I want to get all of the data from all of the places into the stage first. So that's kind of the very first step that I do. After that, we then began applying what you just said. We format it into a schema. We make it make sense. The very first thing I would do if I was staging it into a SQL Server table, a heap, the very next step would be read the heap and take these text columns that contain dates and numeric values and try to fit them into date and numeric fields, right? I would make that attempt. And if something happens and it won't fit, maybe one of the date columns has February 30th in it. Maybe somebody fat fingered something and put the 13th month in there. Anything could happen. I'm going to redirect that row and try to store that data, but I want a human to look at it. And that can happen in a data lake. It can happen in loading heaps, tables from anything else. But the idea is I want to pick up whatever's out there, get it into this engine that I can then apply these rules to. Like, my very first rule is strong typing. I want to make sure that I get all of the values that are valid out of there. And I also want to mark the invalid values for later. And eventually we flow down this to the end, and we get to a place where, we've got a collection of all of the values we've ever loaded. And, we then fit our new data, our new load, we fit that new data into that prospect, but not before going through that staging process, then some cleansing. And that first step in cleansing for me is strong typing. Usually there's a second step that minimal of another step that applies soft rules. So if I'm loading claims data for an insurance company and I've got a claim initiated date, I may have a claim closing date or settle date, I want to check. A soft rule would be the claim settle date is greater than the claim initialized date, stuff like that.
That makes sense. So kind of like common sense rules. So I guess you said you want to remove the constraints. So that probably plays into the fact that you hear the term denormalization being used a lot. Is that what they're referring to?
Somewhat. Usually I apply denormalization when we get to the end of a relational funnel here where I'm loading, ETL stuff. And what I'm after there is flattening out the data so that it's ready for the consumption in these reports that tell me how's my enterprise doing today. And you get various and sundry opinions about denormalizing data. If you think about third normal form, something you mentioned earlier, the premise behind Cod's rules of normal forms and normalization is that one of the principles is you only want to have data live in one place. So this value you want in a single location. You don't want to copy it in 14 different places or even two. You want to be able to keep it in one location because if that data needs to be changed or if we make a change to it, we don't want to have to go hunt it down. It's here.
Right. And also one of the canonical examples is an address.
Right.
Right. So and I think this is really, to me anyway, this underscores kind of why the two philosophies on that are important and why they're both compatible in a sense. So if you have an address, if I'm more like an online transaction platform, right? OLTP, or processing. That's what the TP stands for, not toilet paper, although people are reporting it. But if you're dealing with like a real time transaction, you want to know the customer's current address.
Exactly.
Right. But if
and
you
some
want to
people
do kind of, sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
But if you want to know historically, if you're doing reports on where customers have sent stuff or what their addresses have been, then you would want to, but by definition, you kind of have to store those addresses in more than one place. That this order was placed on this date and was sent to that address, as opposed to this is where customer X lives today. They live in this address.
Absolutely. And that's a great example. And there's yet another use case. Some people own multiple homes, and so they have multiple current addresses. And this is where you start getting into things, kind of getting interesting. I'll say it that way in data warehousing. But that's if you look at the percentage of all of the people who have an address in the world, most of them by far have a single address at a time, and they go through this. But you do definitely have to account for those customers who may have something shipped to, say, one location, and kind of like going back to Amazon. This has happened to me. I own, I have one address. I own one home. Me and a mortgage company. But I have been on vacation and ordered from Amazon and had it shipped to the address where I was, overnight there as well. So this is one of the things that looks simple that, is not so simple. And a friend of mine and co-author, Tim Mitchell, he's a ETL specialist, and Tim actually blogged. He wrote a really good blog post about, how fuzzy some of these concepts can be. And I believe the title was "What is a Day?" So you think about it, it's like, well, yeah, at timmitchell.net, if you want to check that out and search for it. And he brought up some really good use cases. What is a day? You would think, sure. And we think that's simple. No, it's not. Mm-hmm. And part of what happens, and I kind of skipped right over this, is when I'm collecting data from these different locations, I'm doing ETL. It could be somebody has a warehouse in Liverpool, England, and they've got a bunch of warehouse locations in Canada and the U.S. and Mexico, and maybe even in East Asia, wherever. They store dates in different formats.
Yeah.
So I could have what looks like a 13th month, right? I could have 13-03-2020. You and I know, because we work with this so much, that's referring to the 13th of March. But in the United States, we would reverse the first two. We would have 03-13-2020. And one of the goals of data warehousing, or even ODS, is to collect that data and then pick a format. It doesn't matter which, just pick one and make that the format you're going to use for dates. The same goes for other measurements that you're using. And it can go beyond that. The weights in some locations are going to, if I set up something that includes how much something weighs in Germany, I'm probably going to get kilograms. But if I do that in Wisconsin, I'm going to get pounds. Nothing against Wisconsin, nothing against Germany. It's just different. So we have to convert so that when we do comparisons on how much things weigh, it doesn't matter which measure we pick, by the way. It just needs to be consistent so that we can compare apples to apples. If we're trying to tell which is heavier, something that weighs 2 pounds or something that weighs 2 kilograms, we're going to get different answers.
No, that's a good point. That's a good
Yeah.
point. And there's all those sorts of things. And you're right when it comes to you kind of narrowing down, what do you mean by this? And I think one example that's not necessarily data related was I was on a mapping project. It was basically for a hotel chain in. They wanted to map out local points of interest
Right.
in San Francisco. And this was all done in Silverlight maps and all that. Very cool 3D work, although it doesn't work anymore. But take my word for it, it was awesome.
Yep.
But one of the questions that I had, and I worked with the manager of the hotel, is they wanted to be able to put pins on various points of interest. Now, for some things, that's easy.
Right.
But when it came to like a park, well, where's the entrance to the park? Where is the park really? Like,
Right.
I think it was Golden Gate State Park or whatever. It was
Mhm.
like, well, where is the park? Where do you want that pin to be?
Right.
Do you want it to be at the center of the park? Do you want it to be at the gate? Or do you want it to be the part that was ultimately they went with the part that was closest to the hotel? So the distance was a little bit less. But I mean,
Yeah.
like, how do you define where something is precisely? That's a, and that ultimately, I think it should come down to what's the problem you're trying to solve, which in
Yep.
this case was, how do you get there and sort of thing. So it's an interesting problem that data modeling and as well as geospatial stuff kind of does get into.
Sure. Yeah, it really is. And when you start looking at that, people could say, well, you're fudging, the answer because maybe there's only one entrance to the park and you're wanting to show who's closest and you happen to be closest to, the complete opposite end of the park. And yet,
Right.
if you're a hotel, you may want to advertise, hey, we're closer to the park than anyone else, even though you can't get in that way. And it's not.
Well, in this case, I working with them, they wanted to make sure that it was the entrance closest to them was, I think,
Gotcha.
what they were
Yeah.
going for. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, I mean,
fair.
totally.
Yeah, totally
Totally. Like,
fair.
I
And it's
remember. Sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Frank. No, go ahead.
Oh, real estate people play this game all the time. Like, they
Yeah.
say they're minutes of New York City. Okay, 90 minutes, 10 minutes.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
um, I once looked at a property. This is back when I lived up there. They said that they were 10 minutes from New York City,
Hmm.
and it was in Bayonne, and I'm like, that's not possible. Turns out, remember, Staten Island is technically part of New York City. So you were
True.
10 minutes from Staten Island. No knock on Staten
Oh.
Island. I was born there. So, respect to Shaolin, as Wu-Tang would say. Um, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's fine. I'll explain it another day. But no, I mean, was it true? Yes. Was it accurate? No, yeah, but was it meaningful? No.
Mm.
Because most people, when they say New York City, you assume Manhattan. And
Right.
and then it was closer to 60 minutes or 65 minutes, which
Wow.
again is minutes away. It's just
Yeah.
a personal pet peeve. Sorry, I just
Well,
remember.
no, it's accurate, and it's like you said. I play this game all the time with data. The difference between accuracy and truth, and
Right.
really in the middle, there's this whole other thing where it's the art of communication, right? And uh, the fact that the book "How to Lie with Statistics" was written in the '40s is a clue. Not new.
Yeah.
People have been playing these games with statistics and our language and the exactitude of our language. A lot of people throw off on King James English, but it was very accurate. So it was way more precise than what we use now. And there's all of this science that goes into literally and into tricking someone into believing what you want them to believe while presenting non-truth using accurate terms. And one of them, one trick is anchoring. And if you haven't read about anchoring, it is you can just suggest any number. It has nothing to do with anything else. But if that number is a high number, and then you ask someone to estimate some other thing that it's been shown, it's been proven over and over again, they will guess higher on that estimate. And if you then anchor them with a very low number and do the same trick, different group of people, maybe different day, they'll guess consistently lower. The estimation is anchored to the number they previously heard. And it's a scientific fact about the way the human mind works. So,
Yeah.
you can,
No, that makes a lot of sense.
well, we can see this, we see this in data probably, these days more so maybe than before, as we're looking at statistics dealing with the pandemic. And a friend, Andrea Benedetti, who is as a Microsoft employee, Power BI specialist. Pretty sure he was an MVP before he joined Microsoft. He lives in Italy, and he's been posting at aka.ms/COVID report. And he's been updating this almost daily with numbers from around the world about that. He posted about a week or so back that when he stops and thinks about the numbers and realizes these are lives, especially the lives that are lost, it's almost, what he was saying was like, you almost can't do this kind of work and keep that in your mind at the same time. As I don't know the right word for this, but in my opinion, it's a noble thing to do. It's like when I hear about jaded doctors and nurses, my first thought these days is, what did it take to get you to jaded? It's like, if your options are functioning, jaded, or not functioning in that role, especially in these days, Frank, I'll take jaded. It's, you don't understand. It's real easy to sit back an armchair quarterback and say, you should not disengage your emotions. You should just do this job. I mean, my ex-wife's a neonatal intensive care unit nurse. And I've had some insight into what this can do when someone loses a patient, especially an infant. It's crazy hard. And to ask people to just, no, I want you to keep feeling everything. It's like, I don't think you understand really what you're asking folks to do. And Andrea mentioned something like that. These numbers are lives. These numbers are people.
So two things. One, on the numbers aspect, we've addressed this before. And the story is, you can go back and listen to it. We've been recording almost 3 years, so crazy that we have that much content. But you had done a thing about collecting data about the hurricane and all that. And
yes,
I kind of said offline, I mean, these are people's lives, and kind of the story behind this was when I'm a survivor of the attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11. Don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Right.
But I was sharing my pictures that I took with researchers and kind of people that were doing the fire research over at NIST. There was this moment where I didn't respond to the guy in a while, and I basically said, sorry, I'd been to like maybe about 7 or 8 funerals this week because, what happened. And and then he kind of wrote back, he goes, it's really hard. I forget sometimes that when I look at the pictures of the burning building, I'm looking at people's basically death scene. And, he was kind of like the funeral thing kind of, I don't know, brought him back to that. Like, these are people's lives. Like, and you're right. I mean, one of the things I did when I was in college, I about halfway through college, I originally went to college to be an engineer, chemical engineer, then switched to computer science. We talked about that in the previous episode, kind of the humorous aspect of that. But about midway through, I thought, well, when maybe I want to go to pre-med, and I became an EMT and stuff like that. And it's a hard job because you really have to kind of mentally insulate yourself from what's happening around you.
Absolutely.
And the hardest part of that job was really the emotional toll, because you can see somebody injured and kind of think about it almost like a car, like not a living thing. Like, you have to repair this, you have to patch that up. That kind of helps you do it. But then, like, what sticks with you is, why would one human being do that to another person? And that psychological aspect. So I've always had respect for the medical community because they can kind of do that. But I think it's, that separation of kind of what you're seeing from what it means, I think is a core survival instinct that I think all people have to a certain degree, but the medical people have really perfected it.
Well, and it's a whole concept there. I think we're dancing around empathy, and being
Yeah.
able to not turn it off, but maybe turn it down,
Yes.
so that you can continue to function logically and walk through the steps, especially in the case of an EMT. And Frank, I say this being the type of person who cannot do that. It is not possible for me to do that consciously. But I had this one experience. Went through, of course, I worked in manufacturing back in the 90s. I was a plant electrician. We had to go through first aid just in case. And late one night, I'm on third shift, and we had a medical emergency occur. Now, keep in mind that at the end of the medical training, the nurse, registered nurse that delivered this training to us, first aid and such, she says to me, Andy, if somebody gets hurt, you take a flashlight and go outside and wave down the ambulance. Make sure they know how to get into the plant parking lot, because you're not going to be very helpful. And they weren't wrong.
Right.
Just listening to my responses to this. But this did happen. Somebody got hurt, and they were potentially in a life-threatening situation. And I guess it was my old Army basic training first aid kicked in or something. But as soon as I realized, the first thing I saw the person, I was the first one to see them come out of the place where they had been hurt. I won't explain in detail, but I could tell they were hurt. It was very easy to glance at this person and realize they were hurt bad. The I remember thinking, Frank, I'm the only one here who can help right now.
Right.
The rest of the people were working on the other side of the building. It was a large facility. And once I had that thought, it was like the entropy. It was like the emotional connections. The empathy, they just turned off, and I just went into gear. And realizing that I was able to help them, I won't say I saved their life. I don't think so, but I definitely helped. By getting to them first, calling 911, and doing first aid.
Yeah.
So, I've had that experience, so I can kind of relate to just a thousandth of a percent of what it must be like being in medicine on a normal day, and these are
Yeah.
not normal days.
No, it's
So,
true. It's
yeah,
true. It's God bless people who can do that and who are doing it.
agreed, agreed.
So,
But
so one last question
sure,
on the
sure.
data warehouse deep dive.
Hmm.
I think we've kind of danced around about denormalization, but star schema versus snowflake schema.
Yeah, so I consider snowflakes to be actually a component of star. It's a way to represent hierarchies in a star schema. You can have a snowflake dimension. A great example of that is found in the AdventureWorks database, where they have products that are have subcategories, and subcategories are related to categories. When you load that data, of course, you want to start at the top of the hierarchy, load categories first, because there could be a brand new category that has a brand new subcategory that has a brand new product. If you try to load that from the bottom, what you want to do is you want to kind of grab these keys that are artificial. We call them surrogate keys. You want to grab that from the next level up on the hierarchy. So you have to load it from the top down to get that in. And adding confusion to this these days is there is a database engine called Snowflake,
I
and
was
it's
going to
a
say, yeah.
totally online engine. And I am not an expert in it, but I do know, just from working closely with someone who is an expert in it, that it's really fast for loading large amounts of data, as long as you're not trying to maintain like updates to that data. It gets painfully slow when you try to update data in that platform. Again, there are advantages and disadvantages. And the truth is, Frank, there's some data that you never update. Like you never hear the weather person say, "Yeah, I know we said yesterday the high was 55 Fahrenheit, but it was really 56." That
No,
never happens. you know
right,
that
right.
data is set, and it's recorded that way, whether it's right or wrong. It's recorded that way for that time. Um, Financial currency exchange rates, same sort of thing. They pick a day time. Some agency runs the algorithms, and bam, you don't ever hear them changing that. That's not updated. So if you're loading that kind of forward only type data, you know, any kind of platform that's good at inserts is going to be really good at managing that type of data. So, and there's other ways to attack updates as well. You can do these transactional things where you have a from date and a to date appended to the data, and you can convert then your, maybe data that is being updated. The way you update it is you put in, it's from this date time to this other date time. Maybe it is updated from the last time, but you're inserting a new row every time that there's an update. And you see this in accounting, generally accepted accounting practices, double entry, dual entry ledgers. They're done that way all the time, every time. Even if there's a mistake, even somebody goes to the bank and takes out, $200 and, they only get 100, don't realize it till later, and they have to adjust that. What you'll see, you won't see them erase the 200 and put 100. They'll add another entry that says there's an extra $100 in that account. That's the way that accounting works on paper. And again, it's an update, but it's a transactional kind of list or log, if you will, that says, nope, we just add a new transaction to fix the mistake.
So it's kind of like HBase that way, where once data is in the ledger, it's immutable.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way, much better way to say that than I did.
Jesuit education, I guess. I got a bag full of them $20 words.
That's funny. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to attack it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of ways to solve some of the same problems, that we're doing. And we can end up playing to the strengths of the software that we're using or the platform that we're using. We always want to do that because speed is king, especially these days, or queen.
It's true. So what are your thoughts as a long time kind of data warehouse, data engineer? What are your thoughts on Synapse? Azure Synapse is meant to be kind of the next generation of SQL data warehouse. I have seen presentations where I've kind of seen the bigger picture, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts about that?
So I've not yet used Azure Synapse. And
I don't know of anyone personally that has. I can't even get access to it, and I like to think I'm one of the cool kids.
To my discredit at this point, I haven't yet attempted to gain access to it. So I'm looking at it purely based on marketing information, and we know marketing information is usually accurate. But we had that discussion earlier about accuracy versus true. So there's a caveat hanging off that. So having not sort of hung it on the wall and thrown the switch, I don't know enough to really give you experience-based feedback on that. But what I can tell you from just kind of a general architectural overview, I have seen enough information, not only from marketing people, but from some practitioners, and the way they're approaching solving the problem they're trying to solve. It very much appears to be a next generation type thing. And Frank, I've written a couple of books with design patterns in the title. Well, two editions of the same book, SSIS Design Patterns, and I think about that a lot when I'm speaking architecturally. And I use this analogy to describe just the concept of design patterns. You can think about it as like Legos, right? Maybe everybody has played with Legos. I did. And you build that, you're going to build a Lego wall. So you put a few Legos, bottom up against each other, and that's your base. And then you build your next layer on top of them, and, another layer on top of those. And before you're done, you've got 3, maybe 8 Legos high. You've got this wall. I picture design patterns that way. And elegant patterns lend themselves to that kind of self-similarity, just at different scales. And the more you're able to do that, once you're able to take these basic functions like storing data, reporting data, data acquisition, all of these pieces, once you put these together, that's kind of like your base bottom part. But then if you can add a little bit of automation to each of those, now you're building on that second layer and maybe on that third layer. And I think that's where Synapse is. I think it's at least number two, maybe third layer, where they're starting to group these together under a common interface and kind of mask some of the complexity that happens beneath that. And I'm totally all for that. I'm an automation freak. You know this. And that's what it looks like to me. It looks like they're trying to simplify the stuff that could be challenging. Does that mean challenges won't exist in it? Goodness, no. They will, and you'll still need expert help in these other areas here, and in specific areas. But you may not need as much as you did before. So, what I like about this division of labor is you're applying expertise only where you need it. And in other words, another way to look at it is you're not hiring an expert to come in and do this very basic stuff for you. You've automated that. So you don't need to pay an expert wages to do that pretty, what we consider kind of menial for the expert. If you automate those types of things away, and there's a slew of that available and tons of examples. Business intelligence markup language is one for generating SSIS packages. Staging is a pretty simple pattern. Read the data and write it into, this heap, as I talked about earlier. That's a pattern that doesn't, you don't want to pay somebody $1 bajillion an hour to do that. You can get a junior person to do that type of work. Even better, you pay someone who has expertise in BIML, business intelligence markup language, and they just build it all for you through automation. And I got some wild stories about that. My biggest anecdote is I did 10 and a half months of work in 3.5 days. So wow. It's that kind of game changing stuff. But again, as long as you can get, as long as you create an interface that masks the drudgery of repetitive work away, then you only need experts for the places where you need expertise. And that can change the game. It changes it economically, and it changes it from a technological standpoint as well. So
interesting.
That's what appeals to me about the tidbits I've gleaned from listening to people talk about Synapse and looking at a couple of demos. As an MVP, I get very honored to be able to do these product group interactions with Microsoft, and I've attended at least one of those. I want to say maybe two, and we get to see a little behind the scenes. Not much. It's not as much as you think, but we're talking to the team, and nothing against the marketing people. They're doing their thing, and God bless them. We need them. But I'm talking to the engineers. I'm watching them use it.
People that are making those decisions about what's possible, what's practical.
Exactly.
Yeah, you definitely get a better or a clearer picture of what's going on.
I would say different. It's nothing. Again, marketing is doing its thing, and I'm not a marketing person.
Clearer, or at least closer to the source.
There we go. Yeah, I agree with you, and it is definitely clearer, and it makes more sense to me because I am an engineer, so I get it. But that's,
as Hunter Thompson would say, the main nerve.
There we go. And so, in a nutshell, I would say Azure Synapse, based on, again, my limited exposure to it, appears to be one of these next level jumps. And I refer to these often as tectonic. They're laying down a whole new layer here, and they're building on, like on my Lego example, they're building the next layer of the wall. That's what it looks like. Those are, they used to be every decade or so, we'd have that sort of stuff, but it's accelerating. So now I'm seeing a couple of 3 times a decade where we get this new tectonic shift in what we can do, and automation that's built on top of the previous layer of automation. That's how I see it. So don't know if that helps or hurts.
No, it definitely helps. So with that, we're at the hour. Just want to point out, I also have a meeting I gotta go on to.
Okay. Yeah.
We had a great session here. Hopefully this answers some of your data warehousing questions. And if you want, we could do another deep dive. And let us know what you think of the show. If you're interested in ebooks or not ebooks, audiobooks, Audible is a sponsor, so go check it out. I should probably see if there's any good data warehousing books on Audible.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of them have to be written, I think, because of the
Yeah, I was
examples.
gonna say, like, I don't know, but it'd be interesting to see if there are. I'll do a search. If you are not already an Audible subscriber and you would like to get one free audiobook on our dime, or actually it's Audible's dime, and you go to thedatadrivenbook.com, routes you to an Audible page. If you get a subscription after that, they toss us a dime or two and help support the show. Particularly given that my monetization strategy has been primarily driven through Amazon merch, which has been shut down.
Yeah.
Every
It'll
little
be
bit
back.
helps.
It'll be back.
It'll be back. It'll be back. Teespring is still shipping. So
Very true. Very true.
That design that I got in trouble with, I actually have one printed version on the way. So it'll be fun. Anyway. I'm not going to post it to Instagram. I'll just put it that way. But with that in mind, have a great day and stay safe out there. Any other parting thoughts?
Nope, that's perfect.
Awesome. And we'll let the nice British lady end the show.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen. Become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.